welcome back to Invisible UX. Today we'll continue our series on Figma tutorials with part 2 of a session on Figma alignment tools. Enjoy.
Okay, so tidy up kind of takes a guess as to how the object should be arranged. It can be kind of arbitrary, but it might be a good first step to cleaning your components up and arranging them nicely. It's a bit hit or miss though. I don't really like to use the tidy up tool. I prefer a little bit more control. So once again, if I hit Command Z for undo, I can select distribute vertical spacing or distribute horizontal spacing. So any guesses, I'll pause for a second. You can kind of think about what might happen here. But also remember what the align tools did, right? These tools are all about kind of cleaning up the alignment and spacing of objects or components. Okay, so distribute vertical spacing is going to distribute everything equally vertically. Okay, so now each of these items is equally vertically spaced. So now if I go to the align horizontal centers and just kind of do a little shifting so you can see each object, now you can see that that space between each object is equal. Okay, again, hitting Command Z, Command Z, Command Z to get back to our organic arrangement of the components. Distribute horizontal spacing, exactly the same as distribute vertical spacing, but on the horizontal axis. Okay. Now, if you really wanted to organize these objects, for example, have equal spacing between them on the horizontal axis, but also align them according to the vertical centers, you would go align vertical centers. That puts everything kind of on the same. You know, it would be a good example if we just drew a line here and included it in that grouping. And that line is going to serve as the center line of these three objects. So now we've selected the line and the three squares. We're going to select align vertical centers, and you can see that that line is right in the middle of all three squares. Now, to distribute the spacing of these squares equally along this axis, which is this line is actually the horizontal axis, we can go back to distribute we can go back to distribute horizontal spacing. It's a little weird because the squares are so big that there isn't any space between them. But if we just undo, and this is also kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but just hold down Shift and select one of the corners, shrink the size of the squares. We can select that horizontal line again, go back to align vertical centers, and then just select the squares. For good measure, let's have some good space between them. You can see where we're going with this. Now when we go back to distribute horizontal spacing, there will be an equal amount of space between each square. And you can confirm that because since there's an equal amount of space, you can hover over this line and that actually tells you how much space there is, right? Another cool trick that you can do with these lines that only appear when there's equal space between objects that are selected, you can grab it and adjust the spacing between all objects simultaneously, which is pretty cool. You might also notice these circles here. So this is getting a little bit out of the scope of the exercise, but let's go ahead and dive into it. But this is better illustrated with objects of different sizes. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to our rectangles and square. We're going to copy this line. So I selected the line, holding Shift and Option to make a copy. We're going to select everything. And then can you guess how we're going to align everything onto that line? You got it. We're going to align the vertical centers. Okay? So now, just as we did before, we're going to deselect the line. We're going to provide a little more space so that there's plenty of space between each of these three objects. We're going to go to distribute horizontal spacing. There we go. Now, just like the squares above, we have these vertical lines between each object that we can grab and adjust the spacing equally between each object. Now going back to the circles. When you hover, the circle becomes filled. When you press and hold over that circle, you can actually switch spots with each other object that is selected without affecting the space. So I'll just go undo. What we did is we selected the circle that belongs to the vertical rectangle. We just swapped positions with the square, but we've maintained consistent spacing between all three objects, which is pretty cool when you're trying to, rearrange components, rearrange a tile on a screen, and you don't want to have to kind of manually or organically rearrange each component individually. It's a pretty cool trick.